Here we are in part 11 of the female reproductive system. 1042 is the page number. We're examining here the structure of mammary glands. Okay, and they describe here in the caption a structure of lactating mammary glands. So this would be at the developmental point where birth has taken place and the neonate needs to survive on the sort of ideal diet, in this case of the mammary glands. The mammary glands are producing milk. They are an appendage of the skin. The skin has many appendages we learned about: hair, nails, glands of all kinds. And in this case, we have glands that have been converted by other means to glands which produce milk. Way deep inside here, at the base of these follicles, lactiferous, shall we say, the alveoli, who are sort of held together as major lobes or follicles, that there are going to be myoepithelial cells which have been primed by estrogen to have oxytocin receptors. So in this case, don't confuse prolactin, which is causing the development of milk. Don't confuse that with oxytocin, which is binding to muscle-like cell developments here. They're called myoepithelial cells for the purpose of milk letdown. So there's sort of a squeezing out, as it were, of the milk in this forward direction from the alveoli where the milk is produced. Notice that there is a development here, an entire duct system, which is traveling this way, directed by these sort of intervening trabecula out here to these pooled regions just beneath the nipple. So these are little lactiferous sinuses, and then there's numerous openings in the nipple for the milk to be delivered to the mouth of the baby. The baby has reflexes, both to tip their head in the right direction and then also to suckle and latch on to mom's breast and nipples. And so there's an art to this. There's also some evidence from research that there is a relationship between the milk that's produced and what is sensed in the oral cavity of the baby. And you might want to take a look at that at PubMed Central sometime to see what sort of research is going on in that area if you're interested in lactation. So here we have a slightly different view from the side, all of the same information. And this is richly supplied by fat tissue. It's an energetic procedure. A lot of the energetic procedures of the body, whether it's kidneys, muscles, or in this case the mammary glands, are supported by fat supply. Okay, so that's an important thing. And again, these are all features of skin. So they are modified or transformed skin structures. Okay. So I'm not going to get into the homeostatic imbalance of diagnosis and treatment of breast cancer. You can read about those at your leisure. Imaging is very important. Some people are taking these courses to become radiation technology people. And so learning to identify the radiographs and what's going on in terms of connective tissues and the development of tumors, and having a good eye for seeing these is an important detail. We press on into the physiology, beginning with mitosis, meiosis. Actually, what they're doing here is they're presenting us with meiosis, and I'd like to present here the idea that there is actually a tetramer that precedes everything that is going to take place. So I want you to sort of be aware of, here we are in the follicle. The follicle develops, And we'll see this. We'll actually have another graphic presentation. So we have the egg going through a 14 or so day developmental period until we reach the Graafian follicle. These surrounding tissues are producing, in the granulosa cells, they're going to produce estrogen. In the thecal cells, they will produce progesterone under the influence of LH. These, the follicle itself will be developing under the influence of FSH, follicle stimulating hormone. And we can see over here genetically what's happening. And we're going from a tetramer, and we're making a division into two 46 chromosome sets here. But over here we're having this polar body develop, which will actually just replicate into two polar bodies. Over here we have this daughter cell, which is going to go through a second division, a meiotic division, and it will produce 23 and 23 in the daughter cells. But in this case, we again have a polar body, and we only have one true gamete. So in the male, we had 4 functional gametes, and in the female, we just have the single gamete as a result of the meiosis. Okay? And that's going to ultimately lead us to this situation here, where we have ovulation. Now notice, in ovulation, we have not arrived at the gamete yet. Isn't that curious? And in fact, here's the egg with its surrounding corona radiata being delivered. Here is the post situation here. Here's the resulting corpus luteum, which retains the granulosa and the thecal tissues, and we're continuing to produce estrogen and progesterone. And here the egg has gone off for fertilization by the sperm. And notice that the sperm is, how shall I say, it is fertilizing an egg that has not even yet become a gamete. It finally becomes a gamete, and then we'll see in the next chapter how a zygote is formed. Okay, it's very interesting that these the timing sequences here can happen in what is the unexpected sequence. Okay, we have what's called here the ovarian cycle then, and we take a look at this sort of ovary for all seasons, and we begin with primordial cells right here at the very beginning. And so in these primordial cells, we have the very first initiation under the influence of FSH, the development of a group of cells. And as I mentioned before, we follow that pattern of dogs and cats of having many follicles with the not necessarily the intention of having a litter of children, but rather to have adequate amounts of granulosa cells and thecal cells to produce enough estrogen and progesterone. So that's the purpose of this. We come over here to what's called a primary follicle, and we can see, look at these beautiful cells right here. Here's the ovum right here, this nucleus, the ova, and the surrounding granulosa cells. These cells are going to produce, under the influence of LH, they're going to produce estrogen, which feeds back on the LH. We get to a secondary follicle here, and we're producing layers. Now it's a multi-layered situation of granulosa with lots of thecal cells. So lots of estrogen, a little bit of progesterone. We're starting to get an antral follicle, where the antrum is this open space filled with clear liquid. And again, now we see lots of granulosa cells and lots of thecal cells. And again, under the influence of LH, we're going to be having progesterone from the thecal cells and estrogen from the granulosa cells. And then finally, we get to the Graafian follicle. The Graafian follicle here is the midpoint of the ovarian cycle, the midpoint of the monthly cycle. And we have the fully developed now ovum with the surrounding, we have a little, how shall I say, eggshell here of zona pellucida. It's a little connective tissue layer right there. And then we have a group of cells here, a layer of cells of granulosa. And ultimately, we're going to get the ovulation event in which this whole thing is going to burst out from this follicle, which is fluid-filled. The fluid here is referred to as liquor folliculi. The little pedestal that this is on is sometimes called the cumulus oophorus. Okay, so there's lots of imaginative names here, and we'll pick up right at the point of ovulation.